Is Navitas Semiconductors a good stock to buy? Let's get right into it and take a look at this micro cap stock. Very small. It's in the industry that I work in day to day as well. They're in the data center, but on the power side. So I will take a look at the validity on some of the collaboration and innovation that's going on with the company and see if there's a potential bullish case here. But first, just quickly, let's take a look at some of the numbers, because this is a little bit worrying. We've seen total revenue grow nicely in the past. However, very expensive operation, resulting in a loss per share. This is very common in smaller companies. However, if we zoom in a bit and look at quarterly revenue numbers, we see a different picture. We see revenue has come down by quite a lot. This is in thousands, so this is only 14 million in revenue for the quarter, up slightly from the quarter below that, which had the same. We're talking 30 million here for half a year, just a little bit less. 30 million in revenue for a half year, for a 1.2 billion dollar company. That's not a good valuation. That's a lot of speculation baked into the price already. And where does this speculation come from? Well, we see here in May something very large happened. And if we look at some of the news, we can see that in May, NVIDIA and Navitas to collaborate. Once again, I'm gonna mark words here, be the voice of doom a little bit. There's a big difference between partnership, technology alliance partners, and collaboration. If you're an alliance partner in technology, you have access to the back end, you can see some of the source code, and you can make sure that your software or hardware fits in a different way than just collaboration, when you're working a little bit more blindly without special privilege insight. Technology alliance partners is very common. We need to collaborate in the data center. We need to make sure that things click. Before updates come out, companies will collaborate to make sure that the hypervisor is running as it's supposed to, together with, for example, backup application, primary storage, the network, disaster recovery site replication, just making sure that everything is collaborating nicely together and that we don't get the CrowdStrike error where we saw blue screen of death for a lot of companies. So we test patches, updates beforehand. This is technology alliance, collaboration. It's less serious. A lot of people can collaborate. So Navitas Semiconductor, maker of GaN, Fast GaN and Gen SiC power semiconductors, has announced collaboration with NVIDIA. This was the news back in the day. Also, Infineon working on the same thing. There's competition. Alright. I read this beforehand, and some of the language here, comparing it to copper wire, for example. I'm just gonna read this section and then we're gonna extrapolate from that. Today's data center architecture uses traditional 54 volt in-rack power distribution, and it's limited to a few hundred kilowatts. Bulky copper bus bars are required to transfer this low voltage electricity from the rack mounted power shelves to the compute trays. As power increases above 200 kilowatt, this architecture runs into physical limits due to power density, copper requirements and reduced system efficiency. So they're comparing to quite the old technology. I know some of the less power intense backup hardware in a data center can run at 400 kilowatt at peak. Not really sure why they're comparing to this very old architecture. I don't think that they run it in a lot of data centers in the United States. I could be mistaken. But from my perspective in the Nordics, we don't really see this. We have more modern solutions, especially with all of the managed service providers that we see in the Nordics. And if you want to look at managed service providers, you can look at, for example, Nebius. They are performing quite strong right now. I will do a separate video on them again, because some news just dropped. But for Navitas semiconductors, there's a lot of competition in this space with power and cooling. Lots and lots of competition. Competition from Hitachi Vantara Power, they're doing this. Competition from just a bunch of companies that have alliances, for example, with Iron Mountain data centers for designing the data center. They're gonna choose racks, they're gonna choose power and cooling, and these alliances can be hard to break into. So you must really have a strong component, some serious innovation to be able to get in there with a no-name brand. I worked in the data center industry for more than 6 years now. Never heard of Navitas semiconductors before. First time was when you guys suggested it in the comment section. Quite interesting, but remember, very little revenue. Less than 30 million for the half year. Huge drop. A partnership might and might not bring those numbers up. Collaboration, very unlikely. So I will sit out on this one, because at current prices I think that the risk to reward ratio is skewed, not in my favor. And for some peer comparison, take a look at, for example, Sievert Semiconductors that had a similar story going on. A lot of retail traders learned a hard lesson on that stock. And in my opinion, it's quite likely that Navitas will go the same way. I don't see a unique selling point, a USP in the case for this company, just from a business perspective. Of course, I could be wrong. Of course, I always hope that investors make a ton of money, you know, rooting for you guys. But for me, this stock is a sell. Alright, that's been it for this video. And as always, hope you guys make a ton of money, whatever investments you decide to make. Take care now. Bye bye.